gymkhanas, shows and other equestrian events, the combined skills of rider and horse make an impressive sight. But there is much more to successful jumping than meets the eye. An extremely important part, for instance, being the training of the horse. So that we can appreciate this more fully, we go back to the start of training and tell its story. Not from a human's point of view, but from the horse's. As I quote from the horse's mouth, the autobiography of colts that have been handled and trained. My story begins at my birthplace, George Hickman's property at Bredbo, New South Wales, some 50 miles south of Canberra. Actually, I'm very lucky to be here, for my mother, who's 14 years old, was being sent to a knackery before George saved her, and I'm here as a result. I was less than a fortnight old when I first saw George at close quarters. He seemed a nice enough fellow by appearances, but I was rather upset at his intrusion into my free, frolicking life with Mum. Mum, however, didn't seem to mind his catching her, so I thought I'd tag along, though, if I'm to be quite honest, it was the thought of being left alone that was more of an incentive. But once in the yard, I discovered to my dismay that I was the prime object of attention. At that time, I didn't know quite what George was up to, but it was for sure that I wasn't having a bar of it. Then he tried a sneaky approach. Very quiet about it he was too, but I was still not playing ball. In fact, the events had made me rather hungry, so I forgot George's antics and focused my attention on a more important matter. It wasn't long before he was at it again, though, and being the center of attention, I began to feel a little self-conscious about being so contrary. A moment of hesitation and I was gone. The rope was only half on, admittedly, but George had been so quietly persistent and spoke so soothingly that there seemed to be no reason for alarm. But when that noose slipped around my neck, I decided that enough was enough. I wanted out, and acted accordingly. Mum, despite my efforts, allowed herself to be led away. I was rather hurt and puzzled at the calm, casual way she did it, and I felt very much alone in a world that had suddenly taken a strange twist, though I must admit that George did his best to ease the situation. Maybe I submitted a little too easily to the headstall, but somehow with the calm persistence and continual soothing words of George, I just couldn't become alarmed. I can assure you that if he hadn't been so nice about it all, the scene would have been frantic, as I would have reacted strongly. I wasn't too sure what George was up to when he started to urge me forward, but the rope around my hindquarters soon implanted the general idea, and I was being led for the first time. Oh boy, a hat would have scared the daylights out of me if George hadn't shown it to me, but once I was used to it, I reckoned that it wasn't really anything to worry about. The same applied to his handling my legs, for I realized that he had my interests at heart, as my hooves need a deal of attention. But then I'd had enough for a while, for the sight of Mum returning was a reminder of freedom, and though George was kind, he was certainly no substitute for Mum. Actually, we'd only been separated for about 20 minutes, but at that stage of my life, that was by far long enough. I didn't know then that this was only the forerunner to several such occasions in the fortnight to follow. but the way George obviously appreciated my first efforts made me feel that I'd done very well, and that I wouldn't mind working with him again. It was great to be let out of the yard and head back to the pastures with Mum. But despite myself, I was rather looking forward to meeting George again and learning a few more tricks of the trade that Mum assured me would one day enable me to hold my own in competition with other horses.